By the way, Putin made the same mistake in Ukraine. He came into Ukraine from multiple directions, and Putin refused to choose and maintain a strategic objective. And the Russian army, thank gosh, has really paid the price, especially in the last week. So, what Hitler does, especially in Army Group Center, he gives, as I said before, he gives the Soviets, especially around Moscow, he gives them a little breathing room. And he slows down the thrust towards Moscow, which was going very well. And then what had been a an advance, especially in Army Group Center, one based on speed and mobility, was slowed to a crawl. And this would really be a disaster for the Germans once the Russian winter hit. And the Russian winter in 1941 came early, which was good for the Soviets, not good for the Germans because the Germans hadn't planned to fight in the Russian winter. So again, Hitler makes a big strategic or tactical, I guess, mistake by slowing down, especially Army Group Center, peeling some units off to the north and to the south, and slowing its advance towards Moscow. Now, we also have to give the Russians credit for slowing Hitler down too. They fought fanatically, and they just had the Soviet Union had massive manpower reserves. By the end of June, the Soviets had called up 5.3 million reservists. I'm not going to test you on this. I just want you to get a sense of how the Germans, not only in terms of land, but in terms of manpower, had bitten off way more than they could chew. They're calling up millions and millions of the reservists. The other thing is that the Soviets had substantial forces in the Far East. They had 8 what were called armies in the Far East. To think of armies as units. And as we've talked about a lot in the class, Stalin was very paranoid that Japan would attack him on the east. But he has a spy actually in Tokyo that is telling him, you know what, it's all good. The Japanese they're going into the Pacific, they're going into the Philippines and Vietnam and Indonesia, what's now Indonesia. And you don't have to worry about an attack on the Soviet Union from Japan. Japan has decided basically to go to war with the United States. So Stalin, after he recovers his balance after the disastrous first weeks of the invasion of the Soviet Union, he chooses to believe his spies at this point, and he's able to transfer the millions of troops he has in the Far East. He's able to transfer them to Moscow by December of 1941, and that allows for a counterattack against the German army, who had reached the gates of Moscow by the late fall of 1941. So again, this is very important point that Stalin doesn't have to fight a two-front war. The Japanese and the Soviets signed a non-aggression pact, which is in effect until the last couple of weeks before the end of the World War II, when Stalin breaks it, and he moves his army into Manchuria. But that's 4 years from now. So the sheer weight of the German numbers, of the Russian numbers, began to wreck the German plans. Halder, who had said in early July that the war is already won, on August 11th, less than a month later, he wrote, "The whole situation shows more and more clearly that we have underestimated the colossus of Russia. This conclusion is shown both on the organizational as well as the economic levels, in the transportation, and above all, the military divisions. We have already identified 360. The divisions are admittedly not armed and equipped in our sense, and tactically they are badly led, but there they are. And when we destroy a dozen, the Russians simply establish another dozen. Pretty incredible statement from a guy a general who just a month before said the war was won. Let me just read one line of his again. We have underestimated the colossus of Russia. So by August of 41, just 2 months after the attack, the German military is starting to realize what they're in for. And so as I said before, ironically, the deeper the Germans move into the Soviet Union, and as Halder had said, that the Russian army, they're not well supplied, they're badly led, but they're kind of infinite. As many as the Germans destroy, well, just as many show up again to fight. And so as the Germans keep moving deeper into the Soviet Union, as I talked about in the previous podcast, they outrun their logistical supply lines. And they lose their mobility because they have to wait for the supplies to catch up to them. And then what happens in the fall of 1941, it starts to rain. And the roads in Russia were already pretty terrible. You didn't have a coordinated rail system. The width of the rails in the Soviet Union was different from the width of the rails in Germany. So the German army has to widen the rail system, which was not so great anyway in the Soviet Union. So Russia's relative lack of industrial sophistication and transportation infrastructure turned out to be a positive. And the fact that in the sense that it started slowing down the Germans. The Germans just can't move their supplies up as quickly as they need to, especially as their army goes deeper and deeper into the Soviet Union. This was true of airplanes as well. It became harder and harder to supply Soviet aircraft. Now, I'm sorry, German aircraft. Now, this isn't to say that the Germans aren't making these phenomenal advances, but it's nothing compared to what they could have done if there had been a good transportation infrastructure, if their logistics had been up to the task. And to jump ahead again, when the Soviet army goes west into Germany, the big advantage that the Soviet army has that it didn't have before are all the supplies that it's getting from the United States. Thousands of locomotives, thousands of boxcars, tens of thousands of trucks, thousands and thousands of radios. And so I don't want to denigrate the courage of the Soviet army, which was immense, but the goods that we were able to supply the Soviet Union, especially when it came to mobility, it's one of the things that made the Soviet army such a fierce enemy once it got its act together.